In today's video, we're taking a look at some offseason rumors concerning the Montreal Canadiens and the New York Rangers. Could we possibly see another offer sheet this coming offseason? Plus, the Chicago Blackhawks have fired front office executive John McDonagh, who is their president and CEO. We'll discuss that, and could more moves be on the way? Coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we have a variety of news topics to take a look at today. Let's kick things off with the Chicago Blackhawks announcing that they've parted ways with President and CEO John McDonagh, who had been with the organization for the past 13 years. Now, this does come as a little bit of a surprise. Obviously, owner Rocky Wirtz made the announcement, felt that he needed to go in a different direction here. One of his exact quotes was they felt like they needed a new mindset to be successful on and off the ice. Obviously, the last few years have been challenging for Chicago on the ice, not being a playoff team after a long stretch of time of being a dominant team, winning multiple Stanley Cups. This is obviously a different era for the Chicago Blackhawks, but before the recent emergence in recent years of Jonathan Toews, Patrick Kane, the Hawks prior to that did go through a pretty lengthy time of, not having good business results on the ice or off the ice, and certainly things have turned around drastically under McDonagh's time with the Blackhawks. Now, I can't help but wonder if maybe more sweeping changes might be coming next for the organization after a few years, like I said, of having, not so great results. But even though the on-ice product has struggled to produce more wins and getting into playoffs, they've still done extremely well with selling out their arena, and the attendance has been great. So from a business perspective, things do seem to be running pretty good, which is ultimately McDonagh's, biggest area of his focus. He does focus on hockey operations as well. But if they're not happy with him as a president and CEO, I can't help but wonder if maybe Stan Bowman as GM might be coming next. I've kind of had Bowman labeled as somebody who could be on the hot seat for the better part of the last 2 years. But I felt last year the pressure might have come off a little bit, but it could be coming back on here. Obviously, if they hire a new person to take over, a lot of their judgment is going to be dependent on who needs to be working below them. I know they've already announced one of the other Wirtz family members is going to be taking over on an interim basis, but I guess we'll see if they remain in that position longer term, if they're going to be a candidate to remain there, or if they're going to hire externally, or what their plans are for the replacement of the position on a longer term basis. But clearly this could mean more significant changes. I mean, last year we saw Joel Quenneville exit as head coach. They hired a fairly young and inexperienced coach in Jeremy Colleton. Did take a while for things to kind of get going under his watch, but they started to play better after a little while, and obviously things kind of tailed off again before the season went on pause. So it's not really clear exactly what their feelings are with him as the head coach longer term. I would say that barring any changes in the GM role, then more than likely he'd return for at least one more year and see how things go. But it's hard to say right now if Stan Bowman's feeling the heat or not. If they're not happy with the off-ice product, considering how well everything's gone in that regard, I can imagine what they feel about the on-ice product. And as much as John McDonagh does deserve some credit for the business side of things, the off-ice stuff really getting turned around, a lot of that had to do with the fact that they got a lot of young players like Patrick Kane, Jonathan Toews. They were the big driving forces behind people getting excited about Chicago hockey, filling the barn, coming out to the games more so, selling more merchandise and all that. So as much as he does deserve credit, the players deserve a huge part of that as well. So I guess we'll see what direction they go in next, and if any more sweeping changes in the front office or behind the bench could be on the agenda next for the Wirtz family in Chicago. Now, as I mentioned as well, I want to take a look at some offseason rumors concerning teams like Montreal and the New York Rangers. Now, let's start with the Rangers, who some of this information I'm talking about comes from a recent article by Larry Brooks in the New York Post, another mailbag type of article where he was asked a question about potential buyout candidates by the Rangers for the coming offseason and suggested that maybe either Henrik Lundqvist or Mark Stahl. The question was posed, if either of those were a potential compliance buyout, which one would the Rangers choose? Obviously, there's a lot of talk around, the NHL maybe offering teams a compliance or amnesty buyout when the season does resume for next year, given the fact that they're likely going to have a flat or decreased salary cap. They had that before coming out of the NHL lockout, and there is talk it could happen again. And this reader asked a question on who he felt would be the most logical choice, and he did not mince any words at all, basically saying that with sentiment set aside, he didn't think there would be really a tough choice, kind of meaning that Lundqvist would be the chosen one, and it really, as much as they kind of see him go on that kind of note, they're going to do it to save the money, and it really wouldn't take very long to make that decision. I mean, Hank's supposed to make $8.5 million next year, the final year of his contract. It would save them a ton of room, and obviously if you look at this past season, the Rangers were right there knocking on the door for the playoffs, and if the NHL does resume its season with an expanded playoff format, pretty good chance they'll be included in it depending on exactly what format they go with. But the Rangers are improving a lot. After a few years of rebuilding, they've gathered a lot of picks, a lot of young players, and those guys are starting to really step up for them. And obviously Lundqvist appears to be, as I mentioned numerous times, towards the tail end of the season before it went on pause, the odd goalie out with Igor Shesterkin really taking the reins. They also got a younger goalie in Alexander Georgiev, who there's been much trade speculation around, but really at the same time, wouldn't you rather move Lundqvist in that big contract if you could and keep the two young goalies who have much more controllable contracts, longer term and are younger? That to me obviously would make more sense, but many just felt that Lundqvist being traded or bought out just really wasn't something the Rangers would consider. So that's what stirred up all the speculation around Georgiev, but really I'm not sure that that's going to happen. So I guess we will see here if they're offered compliance buyouts, or even if they're not, they can still save a bundle here on this contract because there's only 1 year left on it, so they clearly wouldn't have to be tied to that buyout for a long time, and they would still save a big chunk of change. But how the compliance buyouts worked in the past is that they still had to pay the player based on the buyout agreements and how that all works, but the contract being bought out did not count against the cap, so that just gives them complete freedom and flexibility when it comes to the cap wise. So just like erasing that 8.5 right off the books, they still pay him what the buyout amount would be, and then he moves on, becomes an unrestricted free agent, and in his case, he'd either retire or find a contract with another team if he was able to. So I guess let me know your thoughts. If teams are offered a compliance buyout, or even if they're not, what do you think the odds are that the Rangers buy out Lundqvist, save themselves a boatload of space, and put that to good use to really help other areas of the team to really take a major step forward and be a much more playoff contender next season? Now, like I said, the other team we want to talk about today is the Montreal Canadiens, and there's a variety of news I want to talk about in that regard, most of which comes from a Sportsnet article from Eric Engels talking about a few things here. One, he feels that the Montreal Canadiens should go after a more experienced backup goaltender. As we discussed a few days ago, of all the goalies on the market, he's actually suggesting the same guy that I did in that other video, looking at Dallas Stars' current backup, Anton Khudobin, as being an excellent choice. He's played very well the last few years. He's played well as a Dallas Star. He played pretty well before that as a Boston Bruin. He would come at a fairly good price. He's not going to challenge Price too much, but it can take the workload off of him. So the Price can be better rested and likely perform even better over the course of the season and possibly into the playoffs if they can be successful in that regard. So he obviously went on to mention that, and Khudobin as being a key guy. I know they signed Demchenko out of Russia, and that's a possibility he could end up making the team, but it'd be nice to have a veteran, a guy around in training camp that they could rely on to get the job done. And then obviously if Demchenko or Charlie Lindgren or Caden Primo really steps up and really tries to seize that backup spot and they feel that they're ready, then it gives them a trade chip and something that's pretty reasonable to move to get a decent return. So in my opinion, I think it's a move they should make as well. He also goes on to say that he feels with a youngster like Alexander Romanov coming into the picture that a defenseman like Brett Kulak becomes expendable, and he feels like Kulak is a player who could be traded to free up a little bit of space and gain another asset that they could use in another regard. Now, I do also agree with this sentiment, thinking that Romanov is likely going to take on a fairly good role, and he could do so fairly quick and play a decent amount of minutes. Clearly, being a young, rookie defenseman, you do want to shelter him a bit. You don't want to throw him too much into too big of a role right off the bat. You do have to, allow him, like I said, to be sheltered so he doesn't run into too many defensive situations where he might get exposed and certainly ruin his confidence. You do have to be careful with that. But for him to play a regular shift as at least a third pair guy, I think is certainly reasonable. So it does, in a way, make a guy like Kulak expendable. Now, the only thing is you're not going to get a big return. You might get a mid-round draft pick. You might pick up a prospect. But either way, they're not tight on space. But certainly you don't want to have more NHL caliber players than you really need at that level. Otherwise, you're going to possibly risk losing somebody on waivers or maybe moving somebody down to the minors that really could play on another team. So it almost seems like a waste. So possibly trading Kulak with the emergence of Romanov certainly seems reasonable. There's also some numerous reports as well suggesting that the return of Ilya Kovalchuk as a pending unrestricted free agent is all but assured and guaranteed to take place. I've seen multiple news reports on this, and it does seem pretty likely. I mean, we know that Marc Bergevin and the Habs did him a favor by trading him to Washington. They took back a lesser return than they could have gotten to send him elsewhere, but he wanted to play in Washington. He wanted to play with Ovechkin. Of all the choices he had come trade deadline, that was his preferred choice, and they did what they could to accommodate him to try to keep the good rapport, good relationship, in hopes that he would return, because they were impressed during his brief tenure with the club after acquiring him for basically nothing as an unrestricted free agent after being bought out by the Kings earlier in the season. He did seem to play well there, and obviously Montreal's a team that kind of was on the bubble a little bit, and if they could have him for a full season and he can pick up where he left off, especially, on a shorter term, not too expensive contract, it very well could make sense. They're not going to get him for $700K like they did before, but they do have a lot of space. They can afford to spend, even if he's looking for maybe $2.5-3 million or something like that for 1 or 2 years, that might not be too bad. I'm not sure exactly what he's going to want on a contract, but I guarantee after the way he played in Montreal, he certainly won't play for the league minimum next time. So let me know, especially if you're a Habs fan, what are your thoughts on the likely return of Kovalchuk for next season? Now, there's still also some news about the Habs hauling out another offer sheet next season. I see another reports here from TVA Sports. In this article, they're really pushing the fact that I feel Bergevin should be hauling out the offer sheet to go after Lightning defenseman and former Hab Mikhail Sergachev. Of course, who they traded for Jonathan Drouin. And of course, that's a topic for another day. But as we know, Drouin's time in Montreal has been up and down, and so far hasn't really worked out for the best. But whether or not he stays or goes is not a topic we're looking at today. But a potential return of Sergachev might be something they could really seriously take a look at here. Now, we saw a failed offer sheet last year on Sebastian Aho, and obviously Tampa is not a team that would be in a situation like the Hurricanes were, where it was well known they weren't fond of signing bonuses and front-loaded contracts, and a lot of teams are going to be looking for more back-loaded contracts now, because they're going to be looking in order to kind of save some money for the first few years here after this pause comes out of the NHL, because obviously they're losing money as every day that the league is shut down. So we're probably going to see a whole different swing of approach here on the next swing of contracts once we get free agency actually taking place, whatever that time is officially going to take place. But I do think it would be a good move. I mean, Sergachev's a great young defenseman. They would have to make sure they did a better job at structuring the offer sheet than they did with the one for Aho in Carolina. But obviously with Tampa in their cap position, they have other guys like Cirelli who are going to need big deals. They're obviously tight up against the cap. So it would be a challenge for Tampa to match. And if they did match, it could certainly compromise their cap situation, force them to make other moves, which certainly puts a lot of pressure on one of their division rivals. So really, if I'm Marc Bergevin and I really think he's a player I want, I would certainly not be opposed to it. I really don't know what it would take in order to be successful to land him, but he's coming out of his entry-level deal. He's played pretty well. We've seen year-over-year improvement every year, and he certainly would be a great asset for them to still have in their organization. If you take what they have on their blue line now, some experience like Weber and Petrie, you mix in some younger guys like Romanov coming, they can get Sergachev back, that would really be a massive improvement for the Habs blue line. They still have some younger guys too, like Victor Mente, and suddenly you have a pretty good mix of young defensemen and vets to kind of get through here over the next few years, and guys like Petrie and Weber would be great guys for those other ones to kind of look up to and have as role models as they're maturing into their prime years. So let me know what your thoughts are with the Montreal Canadiens, especially in regards to potentially offer sheeting Mikhail Sergachev. What do you think it would take, and do you think it would be a great move and a wise move for Marc Bergevin to consider this coming offseason? That is all for today. Let me know your thoughts and opinions and everything discussed down below in the comments section, and we can continue the conversation. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications. And again, before we go, I just want to take a quick second to shout out and thank all of our channel membership holders. I greatly appreciate all your support. Thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you next time.